I think it's a case of he would have to join the stream, and then I have to invite him to go live. Sergei, you work for Facebook, right? So that's how it works. Sergei's a little tech genius, so I'm sure he can guide us. Let's see. Let me send it to him again, and hi MJ, yuri, NACO, regan. Hope you're good. If you guys go to my profile, you can. What's wrong with this thing? Yeah, but Sergey, I think he can't see the stream. I think that's the trouble, is I don't think he can see the stream. On Instagram, but he can't see the stream, which is very, very strange. Okay, wait. Alternatively, I guess he could go live and then invite me to that. So we're near. I think we're getting there, but we're just sorting out the technical thing, because he says he can see my. Oh, there we go. So he's finally in. We've got Robert Greene. Let me send an invite. It's just connecting. Robert,
Hi.
how are you doing? Thank you so much for doing this, and we're so glad we
Yeah.
could sort it out. We're so
Yeah. I'm
glad we could
sorry.
sort it all out.
I'm a little bit older, so I'm not so savvy when it comes to these things.
Well, you make up for it in different ways, and,
I hope so.
and so I guess that's why we're here. It's a real pleasure, first of all, and a huge honor to have you do your Instagram live here. I think, as I mentioned, so many of my friends were artists and musicians and creatives of all sort of fields. They really look up to you in many ways, and they hang on to your word, because you have such a real knack for, I guess, identifying all of the power struggles that people have had in the creative world, because that's very much the background that you came from. You were a
Yes.
Hollywood writer, and then you observed how people were basically running circles around everybody else with these
Hmm.
Machiavellian tactics, and how everybody was sort of getting ahead in these sinister, darker ways. And just to tell my audience who are watching, basically what Mr. Greene did was he was the first person to call the real BS in self-help, that was all about people being nice and people being out there for good reasons, and you just have to find it in your heart that, look at things in a positive light and everything will be fine. And I guess he was one of the first people to say, actually, humans are slightly more complex, darker, nefarious creatures, and here's why, and bringing back, historical precedent and reason and things like that. So it's a huge honor to have you here on Instagram Live.
Thank you, Arsh. Is that how I pronounce your name?
That's correct. Yeah, we've been corresponding, but never actually spoken. So
Uh-huh.
it's a double pleasure for me.
Oh no, same here.
Yeah.
And This is the first time for me. I've never done an Instagram live, so
Well,
excuse me if
triple
I'm
honor then.
okay.
Yeah. So you're
All
in
right.
California now, in quarantine, in
I'm in
lockdown.
Los Angeles. Yeah,
Okay.
we're all supposed to shelter in our houses or
Yeah.
apartments. So, but it's not very much different from how I normally live.
This is what I was telling people. This is pretty much my life here
Yeah,
with
yeah.
with the piano and then
Oh, yeah.
occasionally the
Oh,
keyboard.
wow.
And so it's not dramatically different. I miss going to a coffee shop and seeing other human beings, but they'll be on their phones anyways, so it's not
Exactly.
it's not dramatically different, I guess.
But I feel terrible for people who aren't used to it, that this is something new,
Yeah,
that they're not used to being alone. I'm used to being alone. I don't mind being alone.
sure.
I actually kind of enjoy it. But a lot of people, it's very difficult. A huge adjustment for them. Excuse me, I'm having my afternoon chocolate and tea.
Chocolate.
Um,
It looked like cashew nuts. I was picking out on cashew nuts today.
no, it's
But,
chocolate.
good. Dark?
um, Dark chocolate, yeah, keep
Yeah.
me
You know,
awake.
you don't strike me as a white chocolate with bits kind of guy at all.
I used to like white chocolate when I was younger. It's too sweet. I don't like things that are too sweet. I
Sure.
like bitter things. That
This
maybe says something about me.
this is why we were speaking about Scriabin the other day, and
Hmm.
Bach even. I think you're a Bach fan, a Messiaen fan.
I love Messiaen. Yep.
Yeah,
Um, Scriabin is one of my favorites. I have wide-ranging tastes. I like a lot of 20th century music.
really.
I'm
Both
getting
sort
into
of
I'm
Stravinsky
getting into
stuff.
Penderecki lately because he died
Wow.
just recently.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's one of those people that like the great pianist Friedrich Gulda. He said you'll only become famous once you die. So he faked his own death.
Who did?
Friedrich Gulda.
Oh, he did? I
And
don't know
then
who
he
that
went.
is.
It'll be a great story for 49 Laws of Power, which is maybe something for notoriety. But he was obsessed with this idea that you'll only become famous once you're dead. And he said in Vienna, nobody's sort of celebrated or famous until they're dead. So he faked his own death and then went off and learned jazz, and then came back with this great knack for jazz.
And people had a funeral for him and they wrote an
I,
obituary and
I think
everything.
there was an obituary. I think so.
Oh, that is a
I
great
think
story.
I think only very, very few people knew about
Uh-huh.
it and were sort of in on it. And then he ended up teaching Martha Argerich, and so he has this direct line of
Well,
great.
it's always a great fantasy that you have of
Uh,
if I could be at my own funeral and hear what people have to say about me, and to hear them sort of falsely praise everything that
of
all to
course,
cover up all of my faults and everything. It's a fantasy that I have and most people have.
what would your fantasy funeral sort of obituary look like? What would people be saying that would make you think, you know what, that was a life well worth lived?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know who would come to my funeral for one thing, but just to hear that I changed them, I had some influence on them, and that you know, I don't know. I guess it's always weird when you go to funerals, people that you know, and they're always painting the person as this perfect icon, this perfect
Sure.
being, no
Yeah.
flaws or anything. And I would kind of prefer that people would be a little more honest. They would point out some of my flaws, which I definitely have, like my sister would know very well. So, maybe something like that, where the real human being, the flesh and blood comes out, not the kind of idealized angel figure that usually people
and
create.
and that's a real underpinning in your latest book, which is the Laws of Human Nature, which I adored. And I think one of the things that is so striking is that you're, again, a sort of rebuttal to all this general self-help nonsense, which is you're perfect the way you are and everything you do is great, it's just other people don't see it. Whereas in fact you're saying we're deeply, deeply irrational creatures
Yeah,
with dark sides that, if they're not tamed, they lead us to tragedy and misery and patterns of behavior that underpin a rather bleak existence. And I think I was reading the chapter where you're talking about even how people like Isaac Newton are not privy to their irrational brains, how if we don't sort of tame this dark emotional reptilian beast that lives in us, then we're
Right.
setting ourselves up for trouble. Now, in this day of, I guess you did write this in the very much the present day, because it came out, I think, 2018, right?
Yes, correct.
So it's still very much in the present day, in terms of social media has come out and Facebook has come out and the news looks dystopic day by day. What do you think is the single, if you could, it's one of those annoying questions, I guess. It's like when somebody asks me,
Right.
what's your favorite composer? And I'm like, well, but what would you say is the single stream or single thread that carries through these patterns that we don't tame, that is making us miserable?
Well, we're in massive denial is
Mm.
basically the main theme that runs through it all. So the most general law of human nature is that people deny that they have such a nature.
Yeah,
So
sure.
if I say that the human being is naturally irrational, that we're naturally self-absorbed and narcissistic, that we're naturally short-sighted, that we can't see we can't envision the future very well, that we have a dark side, that we're prone to feeling envy, that we have prone to feeling grandiose if we have any success, that we have an aggressive side and a passive aggressive side, on and on and on. People's reaction is always, oh, yes, that's true, but that's not me. They may not
Yeah,
say it,
exactly.
but
They have it.
underneath,
I don't have it.
huh?
They have
Yeah,
it. I don't have it.
right. They may not say that because to say that is a bit, brazen, but they feel it. They feel, oh, I know people who are narcissists. That's not me. And actually, the first sign that someone is a narcissist is the fact that they try and say that they're not a narcissist, that
Denial.
they're a
Yeah, yeah.
saint, that they're above it all.
Sure.
So the theme throughout it all is massive, massive denial. And so, for instance, I have a chapter on aggression,
Yeah.
and I try and show, I'm not saying that we're violent by nature, although we have people who are violent, but that we have aggressive impulses. We have aggressive energy. We want to go out in the world and take things and get things for ourselves. And children display this in great quantities. And I always say if children have a show of quality, that means it's something deeply embedded in us.
Yeah.
And I try and show the roots of this aggression lying hundreds of thousands of years ago, and how the so-called ideal of the hunter-gatherer as this peaceful, wonderful creature that existed before civilization, it's not true.
Yeah.
We
I
were
mean,
violent then, we were warlike then, there was murder, there was all kinds of things going on, and so it's deeply embedded in our nature. But today, with all the pressures of political correctness and
sure.
being so woke and being the social justice warrior,
Yeah.
to say to say to yourself, "I'm an aggressive person," it doesn't feel right. You don't want to admit that.
Yeah. Of
And I'll say
course.
one more thing, Arsh. In writing the book, I had to come to terms with the fact that I have a lot of these qualities. Me, Robert Greene, has these qualities, negative qualities that I'm writing about. I had to realize I am a narcissist. I'm a deep narcissist. Well, not deep narcissist. I have narcissistic tendencies, very strong. I
Sure.
can be
Yeah.
very irrational. I am prone to envy. I have a dark side. So I, the writer, it was a little bit difficult for me in writing a chapter and a kind of self-analysis. But the point is, I have a quote from Chekhov that is sort of the main quote of the book. I don't quote it exactly, but it's basically human beings will never improve themselves till they know who they are, until they understand their nature. So if you live in denial, if you think you're a saint and an angel, you're
Yeah.
never going to be able to change, and you're never going to be able to confront your own flaws. So that's sort of the main theme of the book.
I think that's fascinating, and it's also very very new in a way. It's such a taboo for somebody to come out. I mean, an author of your standing, of course, to come out and admit we are narcissists. I am not excluding myself from
Yeah,
this. Here's the proof. And yet, what really I find so fascinating is so many people who read your books, they read it as almost you're trying to say you should be doing these things, rather than you're saying, I'm just showing you how humans operate, or how laws of power govern most business transactions, most workplace environment, how, seduction actually works. And people tend to think that you're trying to tell them this is an apt way to live your life. In fact, you almost go out of your way, not only in the books itself, but in interviews and in writings, to say that if anything, the books should show you how to protect yourself, or how to call out, or how to notice other people's, for example, toxic narcissism, or other people's toxic power obsessed plays, or damage and things like that. Would you agree with that? That it's not really a blueprint on how to live your life, but rather, I guess, almost scientific, not scientific in the stale sort of way, but almost a glossary of things that people do that has probably happened to you.
Well, I have a somewhat novel approach as a writer. I assume that the reader is an adult, that they're a mature adult
Bold
who is,
assumption today.
it is an unusual assumption. So I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm not going to preach to you. I'm going to simply show you what's going on in the world as it is. So if I'm writing a book about power, I don't want to moralize on it. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I want to show it to you straight, right? Without any water in it or without any ice. It's a straight drink of power. This is what goes on. These are the things you don't see. And this is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book out of a degree of anger and irritation. And that came from the fact that when I worked in Hollywood, now before I worked in Hollywood, I had many, many different jobs. I
It was
worked
like
as a journalist.
98, wasn't it? 98 jobs, something like
I
that?
can't say that high. I think more like in the 60 to 80
60,
range.
yeah,
Let's go
well.
with. Yeah, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
But I worked as a journalist. I worked in a detective agency. I worked in a hotel in Paris. I did construction work in Greece. I taught English in Barcelona. Anyway, I've seen all kinds of places, all different arenas of power. But Hollywood was the most direct one. And what annoyed me so much was that I saw what really goes on, what people don't talk about when the doors are closed, how a producer or director who seems so liberal, so woke, so wonderful,
Sure, yeah.
how horribly he treated his employees.
Did his name
Or
rhyme with Harvey Weinstein?
I never worked for Harvey Weinstein. No, sorry. I
Okay.
would tell you if I did. That would have been a whole new chapter in the 48 Laws if I had.
Sure, yeah.
But I was around some real sharks, and I saw some incredible manipulations. And so I wanted to reveal them. So, like, law number 7 is always get other people to do the work, but take the credit for it, which is a pretty nasty law. But that's how Hollywood operates. That's
Sure,
its
yeah.
bread and butter. You get other people, the minions, to do all the hard work, the writing, the set design, etc., and you get all the glory and all the credit. The
Yeah.
actors get all the credit for this wonderful film, whereas they had a tiny, tiny little part in it, much smaller than what the writer did, what the director did, and what all the other creative people did. So that's the lifeblood of power. You get other people to do all the hard work, and you look like a genius. But
Sure, yeah.
nobody talks about that. So I write a chapter on that, assuming that you, Arsha, are an adult, are a mature person with some reading skills, so you can understand irony, which a lot of people don't understand. And
Sure,
so
yeah.
when I write a chapter like that, I'm not telling you to go out and do that. I'm making it very clear that this is how power operates. So don't be naive. Have
Yeah.
your eyes wide open. And that's the case for, all of my books, basically.
And I think even though you draw upon the stuff, your books are littered with great ways on how to channel these dark energies, particularly the latest one, The Laws of Human Nature, where you
Right.
talk about even chronically narcissistic people, if they can sort of channel this feeling of inadequacy or feeling of lack of childhood love into something worthwhile, into something creative or great, they end up becoming CEOs of companies. They end up becoming, but then you also say that if you can somehow use empathy as an addition to our inert and inherent narcissism, that can actually be a benefit. Can you talk about that maybe a little bit more?
About empathy or the dark side?
Empathy in coming out of our dark nature, I guess.
Well, My point is that we humans are gifted. We're the premier social animal on the planet. We have wired into us absolutely unbelievable, almost miraculous social powers, such as mirror neurons, which I discussed in my last
Yeah,
book.
which is great for
Um,
mastery as well.
yeah, and so and we see that in infants. So at 1 year old, infants are so attuned to their mother, if they have a close relationship with the mother, that they can sense her her moods in this incredibly empathic way. And I maintain, I can't say this for sure, but that before the invention of language, which was maybe 50,000 years ago, before that, we had almost telepathic powers
Sure.
because we
Yeah.
were such social animals. The ability to to guess what people were thinking through their nonverbal communication was an extremely high power because we have what is known in science as theory of mind. We're able to place ourselves in the shoes of other people. We can imagine what's going on in their mind. No other animal, as far as we know, has this kind of power. So we are gifted at birth with this incredible degree of sensitivity, but we lose it. We lose it probably starting at the age of 5. It becomes blunter and blunter and blunter as we become more and more self-absorbed, as social media and technology takes over and our lives are on our screens, etc. And we're not paying attention to people and we're alienated from them. And empathy is not something that you really understand. Empathy is an emotional power. It's something that you feel. So I can't read Arsha's thoughts. I don't think anybody really can unless you believe in ESP. But I can sense your moods. I can sense your emotions. If I'm alert and I'm sensitive and I'm open to it, I know when you're unhappy. I know when I say something and it doesn't mesh well with you. Even though you smile, your smile is fake. I know it. I can sense what's
Sure.
going on emotionally. And we're incredibly complicated emotional creatures. We're not this thinking animal. We're very much an emotional animal.
What is the number?
So we,
95%, you said. 95% of our thoughts are subconscious?
well, that for sure, but also I say that 95%, I don't know, these are just numbers, but a huge percentage of our communication with people is nonverbal,
Yeah.
right? So unconsciously, we're picking up signals from others that we can't really put into words about their moods, about what they're really feeling. But we don't have access to this information. We have lost it as we get older, as we become absorbed in our work, and we become more and more self-absorbed. And we, instead of paying attention to people, instead of focusing in on them and trying to see the world from their point of view,
Yeah.
we're so locked in ourselves that that power we're born with, it just basically dies. It lies fallow. And the thing is, it's always been for me, because most writers have this, is that I'm fascinated with what's going on in the minds of other people. I'm not touting myself as the most empathetic person, but I'm always trying to imagine what's going on in the world of other people, because that's what writers do, particularly novelists, but even me. And so I'm trying to say, that person who's working at the supermarket, when they go home, what's their life like? What is their wife like? What are their children like? What is going on in their head? How are they feeling? And it's a constant thing that I'm using all the time,
Of course,
and
yeah.
it becomes a power, a muscle. So I'm trying to make you aware, the reader, that you have this power in you, immensely powerful, that could do wonders for you in your life, that can make your relationships with your intimate partners, your relationships with your colleagues, with your boss, so much smoother. You could eliminate all the useless dramatic drama in your life, all the ridiculous emotional baggage that you carry on with you. If you simply, instead of judging people, you understood them from their world as best as you can. So I wanted to awaken you to this power that you have and make you realize that you have to use it, you have to develop it, and that it has incredible benefits.
You almost talk about it in a way that a musician would understand as almost like a regular drilling etude, like an exercise. And, you know,
Yeah,
as a concert pianist, morning to night, you're pretty much sat there drilling out, playing a passage slowly, slowly, slowly until you hone this skill and you become smoother and better at it. But isn't it mad? Isn't it totally insane? And I still can't wrap my mind around this, that we have fitness exercises morning to night being thrown in our faces. As a musician, you have exercises for how to improve finger dexterity, you know, vocal trilling, so that you develop a very smooth transition between your head voice and your chest voice. But for some reason, when it comes to the things that you're talking about that actually govern really how happy, not happy is a very crude word, but how much we can really get from life and our human interactions, it's almost a weird concept to think about methodically practicing these things, methodically treating them like exercises in a way.
Well, if you ever read like 18th or 19th century novels, like Jane Austen, for instance,
Sure, yeah.
you're really struck by how sensitive people were to the moods and feelings and thoughts of other people. And if you think about it, where does that come from? Why were they so much more acute in that? Is it just novelists? No, I don't think so. I think it was because there was no internet, there was no telephone. The only way to entertain yourself was socializing.
Sure.
People were continually socializing. And socializing is like playing an etude. When you're constantly interacting with people, if your whole life depends, and your whole sense of entertainment and distraction depends on getting along with people and understanding them, it's a muscle that you're using all of the time, day in and day out. You're constantly aware of other people's moods and their thoughts and their
Yeah.
feelings, and it develops a sensitivity. And if us in the modern world are not doing this, even if you go to a restaurant and you'll see a couple sitting there and they're not talking to each other, they're
Oh
like
yeah.
first looking on there and then they share it. They're
They're
not
taking
even
snaps for their Instagram stories, and yeah,
right.
mental.
So it's not something, it's not a muscle that we're using. But the second thing is we're such a technological culture. We want to reduce everything to an algorithm, to mathematics, to
Yeah.
science. We don't trust things that are intuitive, that are not scientific, that are social. And the social aspect of life can't be reduced to an algorithm. It's a feeling. It's incredibly complicated. People are so complicated. You have no idea how complicated they are. You look at somebody and you think that their emotion, you simplify everything you do. You interpret them, projecting your own emotions onto them. So you create a kind of a cartoon character out of an immensely complex person. So this complexity, it's like all of these atoms bouncing back and forth against each other, all these different social interactions with these complex people. Social life is very complicated. It can't be reduced to something technical or algorithmic. I don't care how hard Mark Zuckerberg tries to do that. It's impossible. And we don't trust those things. We live in a
Or
world where we don't trust that kind of intuitive knowledge that's not gained through actual, finger exercises, but that's gained
yes, yeah.
through social interactions.
It's incredibly true. Even from a, I mean, I'm 29 now, turning 30 in July,
Oh
and
wow, man, it's all over for you.
it's totally over now. Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
I could tell you that for free, but but I
Okay.
mean, I think I'm part of maybe the last generation that kind of knew life without Facebook Messenger and without WhatsApp. I think probably around 14, 15, and even then we had like these old sort of Nokia cell phones. And now I'm very scared that the generation, like you said, around 5 years old, things start to dramatically change for children. That there's going to be a generation that doesn't know the world, where you're not curating your every single image and every single look and status and words. And if you even take Twitter or Facebook, before somebody puts some sort of snarky or what they think is a very witty Twitter post or a Facebook criticism of complex financial structures, you know almost for a fact that they've spent 40 minutes backspacing and adding and reducing and sending it to their grandma and sending it to their best friend. You know, what do you think? Do you think I'll get likes for this? And I wonder what your thoughts are on the long-term implications of us going down that path, and what the rebuttal to that is. How, now that Facebook is here and Instagram is here, the benefits, I guess, mean that we're almost ready to compromise certain things that would give us much pleasure, like empathy and things like that. So what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I'm not a Luddite. I mean, I'm here on Instagram and I'm
Yeah,
enjoying this
of course.
conversation. It's very nice to do this. And with this
Thank you.
quarantining, it's great to be able to communicate to people virtually. And I finally get to meet you and all that. But I think there's two ways it can go. There's a hopeful way and there's a very dark way. And I don't know which one is true because I'm a born pessimist. Maybe I veer a little bit to the darker side, but not always. The hopeful thing is that the generation that we're talking about, Generation Z, if you will, that they get a little tired of this world, that they rebel against it, that there's something in the human spirit that can't be squashed like this. And they begin to feel that life is kind of empty with all this kind of virtuality. And they crave actually social interactions.
Yeah,
And they find a way to use technology to actually enhance this power, to actually create more empathy. And so they build groups where people get to meet. They use technology to create social groups that actually meet at a
sure.
coffee
Yeah,
house or actually organize something together. And so that it could be hopeful, but it depends on individual psychology. It depends on a consciousness that the individuals have where they're tired of this. They feel that their spirit is sucked dry by this world, that it's empty and boring to constantly being on trying to get a like on Instagram or Facebook.
sure.
That
Yeah.
there must be something else. And this happens to be the subject of my next book, by the way. I'm not, it's
Oh,
2 or 3 more
really?
years in the making, but we will get that at some
And
point.
do you have a
But
title for it yet?
it's called The Law of the Sublime.
The Law. I love that already. The Law of the
Um,
Sublime.
yeah, and actually, I will be going into Scriabin a little bit for it.
You're
But
kidding me, really?
no, I have a
Okay.
book. I have a biography of Scriabin that I'm going to be reading shortly. I mean, I've read about it before, but anyway. But the dark side
There's an
is
amazing one
that.
by Sabanayev, by the way. I think it's in Russian. If you can find a translation of it, that's
Well, here, I'll
fantastic.
go get you my book. Hold on a second.
Amazing.
Hold on, everybody. I don't think that's who it is.
There is some good that can come from this COVID-19 stuff. If Robert Greene on Instagram goes and gets you a Scriabin biography, all is not lost yet.
This
So
is not. They're hard to
yeah,
find, so this is the one that I have.
Scriabin. Who's the author of that?
Um, Phobion Bowers, a very weird
Oh no,
name.
I haven't read that one actually. That's amazing.
Well, I can't read Russian, so if it's a book in Russian, I don't know if that'll help me.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, the dark side is that the technology overwhelms us, and that we raise a generation that's socially illiterate, that's socially retarded. I hate to use the word, but
Yeah.
that lacks basic skills and doesn't, and so loses a touch, a feeling for what's human, for what's basically who we are, the sensitivity and social awareness, that there's no going back, that we cross a certain threshold. I'm not saying which is which, but that's I did once have a dream about 12 years ago in which I was in the year 2077. I believe that's what it was. And I was walking around and people were all happy and they were like walking in groups and they were smiling. And I had the thought in my dream, wow, they figured it out in the future. They actually created a world that was decent and wonderful. And so that still is part of me. I still have traces of that hope in me.
It's pushing you towards optimism, I guess, a little bit.
I hate to say that because it makes me sound like I'm getting soft, but I do have. I mean, if you read a lot of history, which I do, you understand that things go in cycles constantly. So people become kind of harsher and meaner at certain points in history. So you can take, for instance, the 1920s and the 1930s with the Great Depression. And there's a great German writer, Walter Benjamin, who wrote about the personal lives of people in Germany in the 20s and how, because of these circumstances, everyone was getting mean spirited and ugly. And it was sort of like the breeding ground for Nazism. And then obviously that changed. So things go in cycles. So maybe this is also just a weird cycle we're going through. And in 50, 60 years, as I said, a new generation will come which will completely go back. There'll be like a rebirth, like in the 60s of that kind of spirit. So I don't know. I'm not Nostradamus. I don't know.
Sure, sure. I think one thing that also has changed dramatically, I guess, is how education has become very, very consumption-like, in the sense that people now go and they pay money, they sit in a lecture and they're told things. And the idea, if you look at sort of 16th century Naples, which was the hotbed of the highest levels of harmonic knowledge when it comes to music. And they
Really?
had this amazing, yeah, they had this amazing practice called partimento, which was then sort of wiped out in the annals of history because of the sheer fact that most of it was spoken. So there were very few textbooks on this thing. And there was a graded
Right.
system of maestro and then apprentice. And basically what would happen would be the maestro would teach the apprentices purely improvisatory harmonic modulations till they became second nature. And then the apprentices, as soon as they learned it, they would have to cement this knowledge by teaching it to somebody else. And
Right.
somebody you talk about is Seneca. And Seneca said, when you learn, you have to teach. And when you teach, you have to learn.
Right.
And they're purely interchangeable things. And I think so many of our interactions tend to be, I do this for money, and then I give my money to this person, so they do that for me. The sort of interchangeability of things when it comes to education, for example, has changed. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are many, I'm not sure I exactly understand, but I know that there used to be, you're talking about 400 or 500 years ago, there used to be apprenticeship systems where you learned by doing, by watching.
Exactly, yeah.
You would learn like how to make a violin by watching somebody like Stradivarius, who had a real feel for it. Or you would learn how to play the piano by sitting there with someone, or you
Yeah.
would learn how to paint or whatever. It was a very visceral approach, and it's a very human way of learning. That's how we actually became the intelligent, conscious creatures that we are. So it's a kind of form of knowledge that is being lost now. And also, it's now the idea of, instead of a back and forth, like any human interaction must be an emotional current that goes back and forth. Now it's mostly like the professor, the teacher kind of telling you people what to do,
Exactly,
kind of
yeah.
imposing. And what you want to do is you want to awaken in the student their own creativity, their own way of thinking, so that what they're learning becomes their own ideas. So what we're not training people nowadays is how to think for themselves, basically. We're teaching them how to absorb knowledge and be kind of parrots of other people's knowledge, but not how to take things and think for themselves, which is a real skill, I believe. So, you know, I don't, I'm not trying to praise myself, but I'm always thinking in my books of how I can make the reader come to that point where they can take what I'm saying and not just assume that it's the word of God, but how they can use it in their own life, how it can become something that they can internalize and turn into their own. So much of education now is like feeding worms, like a bird feeding worms to its little children, and sort of telling people what
Yeah.
they need to do, what they need to think. And we're seeing signs of it now where, particularly in politics, where people have sort of lost the ability to think for themselves,
Sure.
to
Yeah.
assimilate information from the news and say, well, maybe it's not exactly that. Maybe what's really going on in the world is this or that or the other. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but that's sort of how I
No, totally.
approach it.
And Christopher Hitchens, regarding your politics point, he said you should read the news to see what other people are thinking. And where do you get your news from? How do you make sense of the world as somebody very critical and, I guess, pessimistic that you said?
Well, I subscribe to the New York Times, and whenever I read it, I get annoyed, and I create a dialogue with things. It's how I read books. I don't assume that the writer is God or that they know everything. I'm
Sure, yeah.
skeptical, so I read between the lines. So if this reporter is saying something, I was once a journalist. I remember very, very vividly. I worked for a newspaper in New York called the Village Voice, and I was sent to Nicaragua in 1983, I believe it was, to cover. This was well before you were born, or most of the people listening to this were born.
I was
I'm
7 years away. Yeah.
I'm revealing my age. I mean, I was young, but this was one of my first jobs. But I went to Nicaragua to report on the war that was going on there between the Contras and the Sandinistas. And everyone, particularly my parents, they were so afraid. I mean, their whole vision of what was going on in Nicaragua from the newspapers was this war-torn place where bullets were flying everywhere, and it was just violent and anarchic. And I get there, and it was this peaceful country where nothing was going on. The whole war was way far away.
Yeah.
No people weren't personally involved in it. And it was actually a lot safer there in Managua than in New York City, where I was living at the time. So I thought, the news creates a picture of something that isn't necessarily the gospel, isn't really the truth, isn't the reality. And ever since then, I've always been a bit skeptical when I read these articles. So I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post online. Those are sort of the big newspapers. Then there's some websites and a little more in the weeds type of blogs that I read to get kind of a range of opinions. I don't like to read like right-wing conservative stuff because it just gets me too angry.
Yeah.
I had a stroke 2 years ago, nearly died. I don't want another stroke. And reading
I've
that
seen
kind
you
of,
recovering great, though. I'm so pleased to see that, though.
I'm recovering, yeah. I can't play the piano because I don't have my left fingers here, but um, I don't want to have another stroke. And if I have to read like right-wing bullshit, it's
Sure,
gonna kill me.
sure.
So I avoid that. But
But do you also see those sort of same annoyances with parts of the hard left as well?
yeah, most definitely, most definitely a kind of encrusted kind of political correctness where everyone is trying to prove how exceptionally woke they are.
Yeah.
And it's very, very rigid. So, I happen to be for the United States, I happen to be vote Democratic, but it's not like I have the hard position where I believe everything that Bernie Sanders believes in.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
I diverge quite often from their opinion. There are even some things I feel socially that make me a bit conservative. So, yeah, I think that people on the left can be way too puritanical and way too self-righteous. Um, I, I'm sort of a child of Machiavelli. He is my spiritual father. I love Niccolo Machiavelli.
Of course.
And so I've always liked people kind of on the left who have a Machiavellian way of doing things. Like Franklin Delano Roosevelt is my favorite American president. And he was very, very Machiavellian. He knew how to play the power game. And those are the kind of people I like. There are not too many of them left like that, but that's sort of more where I swing.
And I was reading about your rebuttal to Nixon and how Nixon's envy and I guess his bitterness and his sense of past traumas unresolved sort of came to bite him badly in the end. What do people? We've talked a lot about the sort of dark truths that live, I guess, inside people. What are the most practical ways for somebody to start or even begin to address these things and to make something more positive come out of them?
Well, it's like, if you woke up in the morning and you went out and you never looked in the mirror, you never looked at how your hair is combed, what your face looks like, or what you're dressed like, you'd be a pretty strange individual and people would maybe avoid you.
Yeah.
So you use a mirror to kind of know what you look like. Well, you need a mirror to hold up to your psyche, to your personality, to show you who you really are. If you walk around never looking at yourself, never looking inside and seeing who you really are, you're never gonna change. You're gonna offend a lot of people. You're gonna push people away that you didn't intend to push away. You're not going to attract the people that you want to attract. So you need to look inside. You need a mirror. And that's sort of what my book is. I find me be so grandiose. I'm holding a mirror up to who you are. So you have a dark side. I explain in that chapter where it comes from. It comes from your early childhood, and I explain why that is. And I explain why you have repressed it as you've gotten older. So if you've noticed something interesting, so many successful artists, the ones that we love the most, musicians, novelists, film directors, they weren't always the best people. They were not always the nicest people, right? So, but they were
Very
able to kind of,
unsavory. A lot of them were
a
very
lot of them very
unsavory.
unsavory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't mean, but they were able to take a lot of their dark side, their impulses, and put it into their work. You know, one of my favorite writers is Dostoevsky, and he was no angel by any means, right? And he admitted it, and he knew it. He was very honest about himself.
Yeah.
And but look at how he put all of those demons into his great book. He even called one of his books The Demons. Um, so artists are the ones that are the best at this. They take that negative, that anger, that kind of bitterness, and they channel it into their work. So I tell people, you have anger, you have dark feelings, you have some hostility in you, you have aggression. Stop denying it, channel it, put it into your work. Perhaps you feel there's some great, incredible injustice in this world. And I don't mean to ridicule all people who are fighting injustice. I very much like people like that. I have a whole chapter on Martin Luther King and whom I admire deeply.
Yeah.
But take some of that anger that you have in the world and actually do something constructive. Organize people in some way on a political level and get something done. That's a positive way of channeling some of your dark energy. And so, like your aggression, instead of trying to repress your aggression and try to pretend that you're some saint, why don't you channel it into some kind of ambitious project, into creating something, into using that energy to be persistent and to not trust other people, to do and to enact your own vision, to have a vision of a work of art or a business or whatever, and to go put all of your energy into it. That requires a lot of aggressiveness.
Of course.
So I'm telling you, you have some dark qualities. They can be other things as well. It could be a rebellious spirit. A rebellious spirit can be very negative if you just say fuck you to everything in the world. You're
Hmm.
just constantly, but it could be something very positive if you channel it in the right way. So first, you have to look in the mirror. If you deny that you have any of these qualities, then you're just pissing away this incredible power because your dark side is half of who you are. And by denying half of who you are, you're denying half of your energy as a human being. And that dark side contains incredible energy, incredible power and creativity. You must be aware of it, you must see it, you must look in the mirror, and then you have to find a way to use it productively.
It's like the Stoic principle of amor fati that I think your protege Ryan Holiday writes about in
Yes.
The Obstacle is the Way. And
Yeah.
you mentored him, I believe. Is that right?
Um,
Sure.
yeah. Yeah, he
Which
was
is
my
trying, I
apprentice.
guess, take this dark energy. When I always think about Beethoven, and he lived one of the most tragic lives, as did Bill Evans, as did virtually any of the great musicians, the Rachmaninoffs. Scriabin's life was filled with ecstasy and tragedy, and in a way, your books touch a lot upon controlling emotion, and they see rationality as a great tool for living a better life. But how do you sort of have an aggression or these dark emotions and also have rationality? How do you channel these things but also try to maintain a rational perspective on life? Because these feelings of envy and aggression, I guess they're not very rational feelings, are they?
Well, if you look at yourself and you go, yeah, I'm aggressive, I have some anger issues. How can I channel that in a productive way? All right, well, I'm going to create a screenplay. I'm going to make a film in which I express that. Or I'm going to create a business that addresses some injustice in the world or that's going to create some pleasure for other people. And I'm
Sure.
going to pour, and once you do that, you're being incredibly rational. That
Got
is
it.
high level rationality. Aware of your own self and your flaws, you are immediately a rational person. You're aware that your emotions are governing you, and you've decided, I'm going to put them into something constructive. And so if you want to write that screenplay, if you want to create that business, it's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require being an incredible realist. So right then and there, you're going to be rational. But I don't want to give the impression to people that I'm against emotions. Emotions are a wonderful thing. It's what makes human beings who they are. And for instance, I talk in Mastery. A great scientist like an Albert Einstein, he would have never discovered the theory of relativity or the theory of special relativity if he hadn't been deeply, deeply excited and emotional and enthusiastic and optimistic and hopeful that he would reach it. To do anything in life, you have to channel and use your emotions,
Of
but you
course.
have to be aware of them. I compare it to a rider and a horse in this book, and I've done it in other books. So you are the rider, that's your conscious mind, that's your rational mind. The horse is your animal nature, is your emotions, right? And there's some people who get on the horse and just let the horse go wherever it wants to. They can't control it. And then the horse goes and doesn't go anywhere, or just sits on the side and chews on the grass, or throws you in the air. You have no control over it. Other people get on the horse and they hold its reins so tightly that the horse is really fearful and upset, and it also won't go anywhere or do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So the true rider knows how to get on the horse, feel relaxed, hold the reins in a loose but controlled manner, and get the horse to go wherever it wants at whatever speed, galloping or whatever, or cantering, and has control. But it's control where you kind of don't hold on too tightly. Well, that's the ideal for how you deal with your emotions. You realize that that they're the animal. They have all the power. They're going to make you create a business. They're going to
Yeah.
make you write a book. They're going to make you compose something. But you have to control it. You have to be aware of it. But if you hold it too tightly, if you repress your emotions, you're going to lose all the power from them. But being aware and kind of holding loosely onto the reins and letting your anger or your ambition or your aggression impel you in certain directions, but under control, to me, that's extremely rational.
There's a lot of people now probably tuning in and maybe feeling.
I'm getting really a lot of weird comments below.
Yeah, that's I guess to be taken with anything you do. There's going to be a lot of guys and girls very interested in hanging on to what you say, which is why I'd love to ask you the annoying but very topical question: what advice do you have for people today sitting in isolation, feeling like they have something to give, but feeling like the world's closed down in a way? What can they do? How can they feel A, better about the situation, and B, better about their situation in life? What are
Well, first of all, people have to be careful. You have to obviously follow advice of the experts. That's being somewhat
sure, yeah.
rational here. But I tell people, you can either, I have an expression that Ryan has used my expression called live time or dead time. And live time is where you take time and you make it your own. You make it something creative and useful. And dead time is just kind of playing video games and wasting away
Yeah.
and being kind of a prisoner of time. So I want you to realize that this actually is an opportunity for you. I don't mean to downplay all the pain that's involved, the fear, it's
No, of
very
course.
real. But you now have a chance where you're alone a lot of the time. You're not having the usual distractions that you're able to get. You can't go out to the movie theater, you can't go partying, etc. To use this time to work on yourself in a way that you've never done before, so that when this is over in 2 or 3 months, you actually emerge psychically in a better place than before. That's the way to turn shit into sugar, as they say in the book. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, we're all very emotional right now. We're fearful, we're panicky, we're anxious. One of the main things I try and teach in the book is to be able to analyze your own emotions, not just react. So I want you to be able to look at your own fear, look at your own anxiety, look at your own depression and boredom, and not just give into it and not just assume that it's real, but think about it. Maybe your emotion isn't actually real. It's based on what other people are saying. It's based on viral things going on. Get the ability to analyze yourself and not simply react. Why am I angry? Why am I afraid? What is it that I'm really afraid of? And then to ask yourself, what can I control? I can't control the global market falling apart. I can't control that I might be out of a job. I can't control the fact that I might surreptitiously become infected, but I can control my emotions. I can control the level of anxiety and fear that I have. I can control how I use this time. So focus on what you can control, not what you can't control. The other thing I try and tell people is that normally when you're bored, the first thing you do is you look for distractions. If you have a job, it's hard and you come home, you just want to binge watch television. You just want to play a video game. You just want to get on Pornhub or whatever it is. All right, instead of that, start realizing that you can use time, you can distract yourself and not be bored, but in a positive, constructive way. And what's the best way to do that? I know this is going to sound a little bit self-gratifying, but is to read books and to find and to, so you're trapped in your house. Read books on history, read books from other cultures, read books on Asia or Africa, or one of the things that I'm reading a lot about now that I'm fascinated by is like Aztec culture, things that are so different from your own world. Yeah. And absorbing your mind, it's like mental travel. You get to travel to Rome, to Tenochtitlan, the ancient Mexican city, to the heart of China. If you read a good book or you read a biography of someone, this is a way where you can entertain yourself and also enrich your mind. And then instead of spending all of your time on social media absorbing other people's anxiety, read books on philosophy that will actually build some inner strength, like the Stoics, or like the book that I like a lot, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who survived being in a concentration camp and came out an incredibly strong person. So read things that are going to develop sort of interior skills. The other thing is, you're isolated. You're not being able to socialize with people. That's a terrible thing because we're a social animal. But what did people do in like the early 19th century when they felt alone and isolated, where they had no telephone? They wrote letters. They wrote long letters, letters that were 7 or 10 pages long, in which they expressed their emotions. They talked about what was really going on in their lives, and they revealed something about themselves. If you read some of these letters, particularly among writers of that period, the level of connection is incredibly profound. So I know you're not going to sit there and write a letter. I'm not saying that. But you can write an email, you can write a message on whatever medium you prefer, in which you open up to the other person and connect to them on a deeper level, where it becomes kind of a letter, where you're not just exchanging the usual banalities about life, but you're actually finding a way to learn something about them and get inside their world. So you're developing empathy in that, and you're also developing some writing skills because you're going to be practicing writing more and more. I'd also say this is a time for confronting your mortality. That's the law number 18 in my last book, is that as far as I know, no one that on this planet is going to not die, right? Everyone dies. It's the one thing we can say for sure, okay? But you're going around and you're not thinking that. You're not saying this, but you're thinking, God, I'm immortal. I'm not going to die. It's always the other person. I'm not going to catch this virus. You're afraid and you're in denial. And denying your own mortality is the source of all of your other petty anxieties about life. Sure. You can't get away with this. You can't cheat reality. And so this is a time where you should actually say, tomorrow I could catch this. Tomorrow I could be in a hospital. Tomorrow I could be isolated. This could be the end of my life. Let's confront that. Let's think about it. Let me instead of turning away from it, let me face it. And what this will do is, if you do survive, and 99.9% of us will survive this moment, you've actually now increased all of your connection to life. By denying death, you're denying life itself.